Hey guys, today I wanted to share my top DPS build for the Barbarian class in Diablo Immortal. So I switched to the Barbarian class about 2 weeks ago, just to take advantage of the Goblin event which gave us double legendaries, and I actually managed to farm all the way up to Mastery 4, and also managed to get all of the essences required for the Barbarian class. So one thing which I noticed about this class is that you actually have a lot of attack speed buffs. So first of all, we can talk about the Wrath of the Berserker skill. So this skill gives you 50% attack speed increase and also a 20% movement speed increase. And you can have pretty much 100% uptime on this buff skill, which makes the class very powerful. And I can see that at least in PvE, almost every single build for the Barbarian class runs this skill, and I can see why. So other than Wrath of the Berserker, you've also got different main hand essences, depending on which primary skill you're using, and these greatly boost your primary attack speed. So the first one is Riduru if you're using Frenzy, and this one gives you 50% attack speed when your Frenzy deals a critical hit. And the second one is the Ardent Fervor, which gives you 35% attack speed to the other primary skill, which is Lacerate, and it applies this every time you take damage. Besides this, you also have the Helmet Essence, which is the new one called Squirm Skull, and this reads that while Sprint is active, it gives you 28.5% attack speed. So just with some of these essences, you can imagine that reaching the attack speed cap for Barbarian isn't really going to be a hard task. And this is going to become more relevant as I explain my essence and set choices for the build. I just want you guys to bear that in mind. And with that said, let's get started with the skills that I'm using. So for the skills that I'm using in this build, I'm using Sunder. This just gives us a base 30% attack speed increase for every player in our party, so this is extremely good. Other than that, we're using Sprint, we're using Chain Spear, we're using Wrath of the Berserker, and for the primary skill, I'm using Lacerate, but I'm going to be talking about a variation with Frenzy, which does pretty good damage, pretty much the same damage as with Lacerate. I just prefer this Lacerate variation because it does a bit more burst damage, especially on the dummy. In the first 1 or 2 seconds, it's doing a lot more damage than the Frenzy variation. So now let's move on to talk about the essence choices. So these are going to be the essence that I use for the dungeon build, raids build, and also the maximum DPS which I've managed to achieve with this class. So one thing that you'll notice straight away is that I'm not really using many of the new essence. In fact, the only new essence I'm really using in this setup is the Helmet Essence, and this is because the new essence just aren't really well suited for a DPS setup. They do give a lot of really good options and CC and control, which works very well in PvP, and there is a lot of synergy to be gained from all the chill and freeze effects from Hammer of the Ancients, Cleave, and also Sprint. But in a DPS setup, I wouldn't say that they're the best, to be honest, and I did try to make them work, especially with the new Endwinter set that we got, but unfortunately they didn't really perform that well. So with that said, let's go over the essence that I'm using. So first of all, let's talk about the Helmet Essence, which is the new essence, Squirm Skull. So this gives you the 28.5% attack speed, like I said, and it also gives you a 40% increase to your projectiles, which we're using here on the chest essence, which is for Chain Spear. So this is the Shackled Fate, which allows your Chain Spear to conjure a Spirit of Ancients, which follows you, and it's going to repeatedly keep casting the Chain Spear effect, which also slows down enemies and pulls them closer towards you. And for the Pants Essence, we're using the Buried Talons, which basically gives a damage buff when you use Chain Spear. So while your Chain Spear is active, you're going to have a flat 19% increased damage for 3 seconds. And because we have almost 100% uptime of Chain Spear, we're going to have this up all the time. So next we're using the Nature's Temper Shoulders Essence. So this basically consumes 1% of your current life and gives you 9,200 additional damage for each strike of your primary attack. And because we have extremely high attack speed, this shoulder is going to do an insane amount of damage, so I wouldn't recommend switching this one out. For the main hand weapons, we're using the Lacerate combo, so that's the Ardent Fervor, which I already talked about, which gives you 35% increased attack speed each time you take damage. And because you're constantly taking a tiny bit of damage from your shoulders, this works extremely well and synergizes with that. So next we're using the Rending Bite main hand essence, and this allows your Lacerate to apply a bleeding effect, which works very well with the set essence choices, which I'll shortly be talking about. And for the offhand essence, we're using basically essences which support Wrath of the Berserker, so that's the Sundered Legacy. This is kind of a favorite essence to use. It's applying a burn effect with the Wrath of the Berserker, and it basically, you'll see the small circle while you're in the Wrath form, and it's going to be hitting everything around you. And then finally, we're using the Falling Thunder essence, which gives you a huge amount of damage, 28.5%, when there's a bleeding enemy near you. And because we're always hitting enemies with our primary attack, which applies the bleed effect, you're always going to have this up while you're in the Wrath of the Berserker form. So one thing to quickly talk about before moving on to talk about my set choices is that we actually have 100% attack speed with this build. So like I already mentioned, Wrath of the Berserker gives us a 50% base attack speed increase, and then we have Squirm Skull, which is giving us a 28.5% attack speed. And then finally, from my character stats, I have a 20% base attack speed increase. This is coming from my Reforges, also the IMM runes, which I'm using, which I've got on my shoulders and also my helmet. This is giving 2% each. And then also I have a 2% increased attack speed as the magic attribute on my helmet. So you guys can actually get more attack speed than this, but you kind of want to reach as close to this as possible, because this will allow you to have 100% attack speed. Ardent Fervor actually gives you attack speed on your primary attack, Lacerate. This isn't actually required because you do have 100%, like I already said, but it's just nice to have another Lacerate essence here, just to awaken it and get the extra 10% bonus on your primary attack, and also because there's not really any other good essence that you could use for your main hand in this setup. So now moving on to talk about the set choices, I'm actually using 4-piece Banquet because we're using so many continual damage effects. We've got the Burn from Wrath of the Berserker, we've got the Bleed from the Lacerate, and also our legendary gem choices, which I'll be talking about. This set is kind of a no-brainer. It's extremely good. It's going to give us crit chance for each stack of continual damage effects, and it'll give us the base 15% increase. For the other set, I'm actually using Grace of the Flagellant. So because our attack speed is so high, this set is extremely powerful, and we actually don't need the 4-piece Vithu, which most people actually run in these kind of builds. I actually dropped 4-piece Vithu for this, and it feels very, very powerful indeed, and I would recommend you guys to give this a try. So the sad part about losing out on Vithus is not actually the attack speed, it's the 2-piece bonus, which is the 30% beneficial effect duration. So if we take another quick look at our skills again, in the skills menu, we can see that Sprint is a buff, Chain Spear is also a buff with the chest essence, and finally, Wrath of Berserker is also a buff. So it kind of feels really bad to have the reduced duration by 30%, but I'll show you guys how I've managed to kind of compensate for this. So let's just press all of our skills here and just check their uptime and see how much downtime we have. So Sprint, Chain Spear, and also Wrath of the Berserker. So we can see that our sprint's about to end here, so we have roughly 1 second to half a second downtime. Chain Spear doesn't have any downtime, and also Wrath of Berserker doesn't have any downtime. So how is this possible when I'm not using the 2-piece Vithus? Well, to answer this question, it's actually 2 parts to it, and I've already kind of talked about this in my previous video. I would definitely recommend watching that if you haven't already, and it's kind of the guide to have 100% uptime for any of your skills. And basically the reason comes down to 2 things. It's beneficial duration and cooldown reduction. So with my cooldown reduction here, I have 17%, but this actually isn't required to be that high, and I'll explain why. But for the beneficial effect duration, I would actually recommend you to stack as much of this as possible. So I've got a beneficial effect duration roll on my belt, I've got a beneficial effect duration on my boots, on my chest I also have beneficial effect duration, and finally on my pants there's also a beneficial effect duration roll here. Other than this, I also have a beneficial effect duration in my Reforge, which is 3% on each of my legendary pieces, and I would definitely recommend having all of these rolls. Now let's go back to talk about cooldown reduction. So cooldown reduction can be got from the magic attribute rolls on your necklace. You can see I have 3% here. On your hands, I have another 3 here, and then finally on your rings, I have a 3% roll here and a 5% roll here. But like I said, you don't really need to get all of these rolls, because another sort of cooldown reduction is actually from your awakenings. So in the past, to get fully awakened gear was actually very challenging, but now Blizzard have actually made it a lot easier. So you can actually buy Dawning Echo, which is what's used to awaken your gear, from the NPC next to the chassis in Westmarch. And if you can save up to 10k platinum, you can actually buy this just with the platinum that you get in game rather than paying for 1000 orbs. And as long as you have a rank 5 gem, you can actually awaken some of your gear to get some of these effects here. This actually used to be a rank 10 gem in the past, but now they've made it a lot easier. So I've actually managed to awaken all of my gear slots here, as you can see. And this allows me to get a 10% cooldown roll, depending on the essence that I've got. So for the helmet essence, I've got a 10% cooldown of sprint here. So this means that my sprint cooldown will be 27%, which is almost a maximum of 30%. And with slightly better rolls, I could actually get this to 20%, and which would max my sprint cooldown. Other than this, you also get cooldown on your pants essence. This gives 10% chain spear cooldown. And then finally, for the Wrath of the Berserker, you can actually get 10% on the shoulders here, And then you can also get 10% on each of the offhands here, which means that you can actually cap the cooldown of Wrath of the Berserker just from the Awakenings alone, provided you have these 3 Awakenings. And finally, the Awakenings for the chest and both main hands, these just give Lacerate damage, which is incredibly good because this build is a primary attack build, so buffing the damage of Lacerate is always good. And then finally, this gives 10% damage to Chain Spear, which is also very good because Chain Spear is providing quite a decent bit of damage for the build. So I hope this explanation has been clear on how I've managed to compensate for the lack of 2-piece vithus bonus, and how I've managed to get good uptime on all of my skills. If you're not able to awaken your gear or can't get the beneficial effect duration rolls to maintain the high uptime of your skills, then I would actually recommend to take out 2 pieces of Grace of Flagellant and just play with the 2-piece bonus and replace it with 2 pieces of vithus so that you can have the high uptime of the skills. So to give you guys the priority for the Awakening for this build, I would say that the helmet is kind of a must-have just to get the 10% sprint cooldown. Other than this, I would check the cooldown reduction that you have here and make sure that Wrath of the Berserker is as close to 30% as possible. You probably don't need all of these Awakenings like I have. But the other one which would be really good to get would be the Panther Essence, so you can also maximize the cooldown of Chain Spear. And then I would go for the Lacerate, both main hands here, like I've done. For the legendary gems, I'm using Pain Clasp, which gives us a 24% damage increase when we apply continual damage effects, and we're consistently dealing continual damage effects from the Wrath of Berserker Burn and also from the Lacerate Bleed, so this just works extremely well. Mother's Lament gives us the increased critical hit chance, which is really good. I'm using Bloodsoaked Jade, and I'm using Echoing Shade with Seeping Bile Auxiliary, which gives us another continual damage effect. Then I'm using Howler's Call with Gloomcast Auxiliary. This works extremely well because this is a primary attack-based build, so it gets the maximum benefit from Gloomcast. And then I'm using Bottled Hope, which works very well because, like I said, this build has an insane amount of buffs. And then finally, we're using Fervent Fang. So because we're using such a high attack speed build, Fervent Fang's pretty much consistently going to be at max stacks, so this also works very well. And then finally, I'm using Sven's Taunting with Roiling Consequence as the auxiliary. This is just by far one of the best gems in the game. It's going to give us increased critical hit chance and also a burn effect, which is another continual damage effect. So other than these gems, some other gems which could work incredibly well would be the 2-star Igneous Scorn or Viper's Bite, just to give us increased continual damage effects. For the Cursed Gear, I've gone for 6 pieces of Detested, which will create a Dark Void, which will last for 6 seconds when you use a skill that causes loss of control. In this build, the skill that causes loss of control is the Chain Spear, and you'll notice that there's going to be a huge black circle if you get this Cursed Gear bonus. And inside that black circle, enemies take 24% of your damage every second they remain within the area. Additionally, damage dealt to enemies in the void is increased by 12%. So this is obviously a very powerful curse bonus, and the base cooldown of it is actually 90 seconds, but having 6 pieces of it allows you to have it proc once every 30 seconds, which is really good. Bear in mind that this actually doesn't work on bosses, so if you'd like, you can actually switch this out to a different one. Something like Lashed would work extremely well because this is a primary attack based build. Another one which would be decent would be the Atrophied. So this one reads that when you deal a continual damage effect, a dark field will appear beneath the enemy, which will deal additional damage. Just looking at the 4 and 6 piece bonus of this one though, it does feel like it's more suited towards PvP, so I personally like to go for the Detested, as it works very well in both PvE and PvP. So like I said, go for the 6 piece of Detested, and if you have all 8 pieces with Curse Gear, then you could always go for 2 pieces of Lashed and 6 pieces of Detested. So it is actually worth going for all pieces Curse Gear active, because the negative properties of Curse Gear has been removed in the last patch. As for the Warband Room, I've gone for the Attacker Room, which will give me a bit more damage, and this is the one that I like to use for the dummy and also for raids. If you're playing dungeons, however, and you need a bit more speed, you could always switch it up to go for the Protector Room, which will give you increased size if you're using the Shepherd's Burden Remnant here. This one gives you up to 15% increased size. For the Paragon tree, the active bonuses I'm using are from the Slinger tree. So I'm using these 2 nodes of Weaver here, which is the Uncanny and the Unseen Dynamism. These just work really well. And for the short burst damage, I've actually gone for 3 nodes from the Ranger tree. Surprisingly, this is actually working pretty well for Barbarian, even though Barbarian is not a Ranger class. I find that these three work very well for burst damage. If you're going for a longer duration of damage, then you could always switch out this precision for this node here, which allows you to have more stacks of unseen dynamism, which will give you an extra 5% bonus. So let's just quickly do a 10-second damage rotation for this Lacerate build, and then I'll show the Frenzy variation, which is very similar to this build. So we actually peaked at 8.6 million damage per second, and for 10 seconds we're going to end up with 6 million damage per second, which gives us slightly more than 60 million for the full 10 seconds. Now this is extremely good. Now let's have a look at the damage breakdown, and as you can see, most of the damage is going to be coming from the Lacerate primary attack. And you've got a decent amount of damage coming from the Chain Spear, and also a decent amount of damage coming from the Burn Effect from Wrath of the Berserker. If you want to optimize your damage further with your Charm, then these would be the 3 skills that I would go for. So now I'll move on to talk about the Frenzy variation, which in essence is the same exact build, just with Frenzy as the primary attack rather than Lacerate, because I know that a few people prefer using this primary skill. So all I've done here is change up a few of the essence. The set and Paragon and everything else remains the exact same. So firstly, starting off with the helmet, I decided to go for the Auslac helmet, and this allows your projectiles to trigger Firestorm. This actually performed a bit better than the increased attack speed. We probably don't need the increased attack speed for the Frenzy variation, because we have this essence here, which is Riddle Rue, and this allows you to have 50% increased attack speed rather than the 35% increased attack speed for the Lacerate main hands. So this kind of makes up for the lost attack speed. And then we're using the second main hand for Frenzy, which is the Lunatic Twin. This works incredibly well and deals a lot of damage when Frenzy is at full stack, and it will keep dealing this continuous damage every 0.4 seconds. And then finally, for the offhand, I replaced the Bleed offhand, which I had for the Wrath of the Berserker, for this oncoming Brutality. Since we don't have a consistent way to deal bleed damage other than the Mother's Lament bleed, which isn't very consistent, we went for this one. So this reads that Frenzy deals increased damage to the enemy by 6%, stacking it up to 30% increase. So this also works incredibly well. So other than that, the build remains the exact same. So now we'll do a 10-second damage rotation for the Frenzy variation of this build. And as you can see, it still performs extremely well. So like I said, I actually had higher peaks with Lacerate, but as you'll notice, for a 10-second rotation, I actually managed to do a bit more damage than the Lacerate variation. I got almost 6.2 million here, rather than the 6 million from Lacerate. And the damage breakdown looks incredibly similar. So most of the damage is coming from the primary attack. So once again, you could go for Frenzy in your Charm just to optimize the damage. I would really recommend trying out both of these variations and seeing which one you do more damage with, because depending on your legendary gems, you could have different results than me. So I'm going to show the Lacerate variation build in action in a dungeon. I'm just playing solo Forgotten Tower in Inferno 1 difficulty here. And the playstyle is pretty simple. You just want to be spamming all of your skills, except Sunder. You kind of want to time Sunder when there's an elite or there's a boss, which you just need an extra bit of damage. So as you can see, I have no problem just making my way through the dungeon. And even with a bit of downtime on my sprint, I'm still doing very well just going through the dungeon here. Let's see how quick we can take down the boss. So here we go, just waiting for her loading animation to finish. And I want to be pressing my Sunder as soon as she spawns here, just to get the maximum damage bonus. So there we go. And then spam everything, primary attack. And looks like our continual damage actually managed to finish her off there. That was pretty nice. And as usual, when I'm recording these videos, I get lucky and get a set item drop. I swear my luck with these drops is always really bad when I'm not recording, so I guess that just means that every time I farm dungeons, I just need to be recording. So before I leave you guys, I'm going to talk about how I changed this build up for Gauntlet. So for Gauntlet's where you kind of need to survive a bit more, it's much better to use the Undying Rage skill, and I would probably replace this for Sprint, because the only essence we're using for Sprint is the Helmet Essence, and then I would change up the Helmet Essence for the Undying Rage duration, which would be this helmet here. It's the Ancestor's Steel, and this one gives you an extra second of Undying Rage, and this would be the build that I would go for. But personally, I think that Barbarian's a lot more suited to play a support role in Gauntlet, and I'm going to be going through a support build in a different video where I use Demoralize and also Cleave for the armor break, but for now you can use a build which looks like this, and it should give you a decent amount of damage while also maintaining a decent amount of survivability from the Undying Rage skill. So with that said, guys, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover in this video. Do let me know what you guys think of the build, and if you have any questions or suggestions, then do leave them in the comments below. But for now, I'm signing off. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.